Today, we're going to talk about how to create a cloud data solution using Microsoft Azure. We're going to cover why data professionals should know about the cloud, and then we're going to illustrate the concepts by doing a live walkthrough of some Microsoft Azure concepts, doing a full end-to-end workflow. And that is what Josh, who's also in this webinar, is going to be doing. And I'll introduce him in just a second. But here's a look at the full agenda. So we're going to talk about what the cloud is, why you should use the cloud. We're going to talk about Microsoft Azure specifically. Then we're going to do our workshop. And if there's time, we'll have a live Q&A at the very end. And in order to get ready for this live webinar, there's a few things you should do. So if you want to follow along, please make sure you have an Azure free trial account. And this was included in the email. There's also a link to the dataset that Josh is going to share in chat. So that will enable you to actually follow along. And then just a quick round of intros. So I am the CEO of Dataquest, which is an online site where you can learn data skills and cloud skills. And Josh, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Yes, thanks, Vic. My name is Josh. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft for our data team. And I'm excited to be part of this webinar today.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you here, Josh. Josh is a Microsoft cloud advocate, so he's an expert in all of the stuff on Azure that you're going to learn today. All right, I'm going to do a quick intro about the cloud and why you need to know the concepts, and then Josh is going to take over and actually do a live walkthrough. So let's get started with what is the cloud? So the cloud, if you think about it, is conceptually not super complicated. All it is a set of services that store data and run code. So you can do this on your own computer, right? You can create a database, you can download a CSV file, and you can run code to actually work with that data, whether it's Power BI, whether it's in a Jupyter notebook, whether it's something else. What the cloud does is it takes all the stuff you can do on your own computer and runs it on a set of servers located around the world. And the cloud does a few things that your local computer can't do. One, it's highly reliable. So it's always on and it's always running. So unlike your local computer, which you might need to update or you might need to reboot, the cloud will always have your data and it'll always be available. The cloud is easily accessible. So if you have a data set on your own computer, it can be hard to share across your organization or company. But in the cloud, you can actually share that data very easily across teams, even if it's hundreds of gigabytes of data. The cloud also has a set of integrated tools. So with Microsoft Azure, there's tools like Power BI that you can actually use to easily analyze your data and manipulate your data. And this is a lot of stuff, but this is a map of all the services that make up Azure. Well, not all of them, many of them. And the ones that are really important on the data side are towards the center right. So databases, analytics, AI and machine learning, and then all the way on the right where you see Power Apps, Power BI, GitHub. These are all very useful tools for data that are part of Azure. And Josh today is going to go through some of those tools. So why do we use the cloud? The cloud helps us manage scale. So if you have a 100 gigabyte database on your local computer, it's going to be really hard to manage because queries are going to take a long time. Updating the database is going to take forever. It's going to be hard to share and analyze. So putting that data in the cloud will make it easy to work with using cloud tools like Power BI, using cloud data pipelines. It'll also make it easy to build data dashboards and share it across your company. So think of the cloud as something you use when you have a lot of data that you want to use across your team and you want multiple people to collaborate with you around it. And for those reasons, because the cloud makes it easier to work with large volumes of data, data stored in the cloud has continuously increased. So as of 2022, 60% of corporate data is estimated to be stored in the cloud. And companies use the cloud across all roles. So data engineers can use the cloud to store and clean data. Data scientists can build machine learning models. Business analysts and data analysts can build data dashboards, and managers and executives can consume those dashboards to gain key insights. So the cloud is really used across organizations. Now let's talk a little bit about the Azure cloud. So there's several different clouds you can use. Azure is the cloud that Microsoft offers. It was launched in 2010, and it's used by 70% of companies worldwide. It has more than 200 services inside, services that do everything from data storage to cleaning to reporting. And it does offer a free trial with credits, which hopefully you've signed up for if you want to follow along with Josh's tutorial today. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Josh to really talk about the tutorial and what he's going to teach you.
Thanks, Vic. So as Vic has introduced and has done a good job introducing the cloud, today we'll be learning how we can create our first data solution on the cloud. To achieve this, we'll be exploring COVID-19 historical data and try to analyze and visualize the data from the dataset. The link to the dataset will be shared on chat, and you can be able to download the CSV file so that you can be able to follow along. But before we get started into building the actual solution on the cloud, let us look at some of the few services that we're going to use for this particular solution. As Vic mentioned, there are very many different services on the cloud, and it's on Azure that you can be able to use for your data solution. But for the purposes of today's demo, we're going to look at these 5 solutions. We're going to look at Azure Storage, Cosmos DB, Azure Synapse Analytics, Azure Data Factory, and Power BI. Let's have a look at these services individually before we go and actually build the solution on the cloud. So to begin with, Azure Storage. So this is a cloud storage platform for modern data scenarios. So you can think of Azure Storage as that cloud service that you can be able to store your data on the cloud. Azure Storage provides different services such as blob storage, files, queues. But for the sake of this demo, we'll be using blob storage. The reason as to why Azure Storage is ideal for storing blob data on the cloud is that it's secure, scalable, and data that is stored on Azure Storage is accessible from anywhere in the world. What that means is you can be able to access the data that you've stored on Azure Storage through HTTP or HTTPS. And on top of that, there are different SDKs that are available so that regardless of what language you're using to build your applications, you can be able to fetch or rather get your data from Azure Storage. For this particular scenario, we'll use Azure Storage to upload and store the data, which is in the form of a CSV file. The other service that we're going to be looking at is Cosmos DB. So Cosmos DB is a managed NoSQL database for modern app development. Suppose you're building an IoT solution and you have these millions of devices or thousands of devices that are sending data every second to the cloud, then you need a solution that can be able to handle massive amount of data at a global scale. And it needs also to have the capability for near real-time response. So in this case, Cosmos DB on Azure is an ideal solution for that. So any solution you're thinking of building for your organization that needs to scale globally and needs to have a near real-time response, then Cosmos DB is ideal. And also, it easily integrates with other services such as Power BI, as you're going to see in today's workshop. So for purposes of today's workshop, the data that we're going to store on Azure Storage, which is in a CSV file, we're going to load that data from Azure Storage into Cosmos DB before we can visualize it. The other service that we're going to have a look at today is Azure Data Factory. So Azure Data Factory is a cloud service that is built for complex ETL services. So ETL is extract, transform, and load. Just to give you a perspective of this, suppose you've built an e-commerce application for your organization, and your e-commerce application stores these large amounts of log data on the cloud. So it could be petabytes of log data on the cloud. And then you have your on-premises database that stores maybe your user data. And you need to analyze and gain insight on the logs that have been stored on the cloud so that you can maybe understand things like user behavior or even demographics. To do this, you need to reference the on-prem data and also the data that you've stored on the cloud. To achieve this, the Azure Data Factory allows you to be able to transform that data, and then the transformed data can then be used on something like Azure Synapse Analytics that will look in a few moments to generate your reporting. The other service that we're going to look at is Azure Synapse Analytics. So Azure Synapse Analytics is an analytics service that allows you to gain insight across data warehouses and big data systems. Normally, a modern data warehouse architecture has 4 layers. You have a layer where you ingest your data, where you store your data, where you transform, you model your data, and possibly visualize or maybe consume that data in machine learning or Power BI report. That's normally a simple structure for the different layers in a modern data warehouse solution. Now, Azure Synapse, when you think of it, it's not mainly one particular service on Azure, but rather it's a group of multiple well-integrated Azure services that are able to work together across these different layers of the modern data warehouse. In this case, we're going to use Azure Synapse Analytics for the visualization of the transformed data from Azure Data Factory onto Power BI. Now that we understand the major services that we are going to have a look at today, let us go to the Azure portal so that we can be able to build our first data solution on the cloud. To get started, you can be able to download the data that you're going to be using in this workshop right from here. So just download the CSV file. I'm just going to hit download because we'll be using this shortly. Now, the next thing, just go to portal.azure.com. So you open up the Azure portal, then sign in. Okay, so it's logged in. Good. So this is the Azure portal. Once you're logged in, we'll start by creating a resource group. You can think of a resource group as a container that is going to contain all the different resources that you're going to create on Azure. So I'm just going to create. And then I'm going to give the resource group a name, so I can call it like Dataquest webinar. Then I'm just going to select the location. I'm just going to select West Europe, and then review and create. Then I'm just going to create that. All right. Now that the resource group has been created, I'll go ahead and create all the different services that I have mentioned so that I can be able to save on time as we proceed. So I'm going to start by creating the Azure Storage resource. All right, sorry about that. It's logged me out again. Okay, yeah, this might be easier. So I've created the resource group right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and create the resource. So I'm going to search for Azure Storage. So Azure Storage. So here is select the storage account and go ahead and create. So just need to provide a name. So I'm just going to select the resource group that we just created, give it a name as well, to give it something like Dataquest. And then select the region, Europe again. And then just review and create. And then just click create. So as that is creating, I'll go ahead and create the other resource, which is Cosmos DB. So for that, just go create a resource again. And then I will search for Cosmos DB. And then we have Azure Cosmos DB right here, then create. So we'll be using Core SQL. We have also different APIs that are supported by Cosmos DB, but for the purposes of this demo, we're going to use Core SQL. So I'm just going to select Core SQL, create, and then I just need to select my resource group, the one I just created, and then provide an account name. So I can just call this again Dataquest webinar. I don't know whether it's going to allow the dash. Yeah, works. And then I'm just going to select the location again. I'm just going to go with West Europe. And then just create. Perfect. So that's going to create our second resource, which is the Cosmos DB. Then we'll create our third resource, which was Azure Data Factory, as mentioned. So I'm just going to come and search for Azure Data Factory. So search for that. So it is, we have Data Factory. So right here, I'm just going to create the Data Factory. Okay, it is, it's loaded. So again, select the Dataquest, the resource group we created. Then I provide the names. I'm just going to call these Dataquest webinar Data Factory. That. Okay, then provide the location as Europe, version v2, and then we need to come under Git and then select on configure Git later and just go ahead and review and create. Then that marks the end of creating our third resource, the Azure Data Factory. Then we have one more resource to create, which is Azure Synapse. So to do that, again, click on create a resource, and then we're going to search for Synapse like that. So search for Synapse, and then we have Azure Synapse Analytics. Just select on that, and then we're going to create. So it's taking a little bit. If from the notification up here, you can be able to see the other three that we've created have already been successfully deployed. So let's wait for these to load. So we select the resource group again, the Dataquest webinar, and then the region is correct, and then we need to specify a data lake storage. So for this, I'm going just to create a new data lake storage. Remember when I was talking of Azure Synapse and I mentioned about the architecture of a modern data warehouse, I mentioned it having 4 layers, and the second layer was storage. So when we're using Azure Synapse, the storage layer, we always use Azure Data Lake for that particular case. So we'll have to create a data lake storage account, because that's what meets that layer, the second layer, the second architectural layer for the data warehouse on Synapse. So just going to click on create a new data lake storage. So I'm just going to call these maybe Dataquest. Oh, it needs to be all lowercase. Dataquest webinar. You don't know. Should work. Yeah. And then for the file system, just click on create a new one, and then we can give it a new name. So for this particular one, I can just call it maybe needs to be all lowercase. Okay, then just click on OK. Then just click on review and create. That should missing. All right. Yeah, we missed some part here. So yeah, you need to provide a SQL admin user. And so I'm just going to provide here okay, yeah, then we should be good to go. Then create. Oh, workspace name. Right, good. So everything marked with an asterisk needs to be filled out, and I believe so. Now we should be good to go. Once I click create, it needs to go ahead and provision the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. Now, as we wait for that to deploy, we'll go ahead and click on home as that is deploying. And if we go to the resource group that we've created, the Dataquest webinar, we can be able to see the 3 services that have already been created. The other one is still in progress, the Synapse. But as Synapse is deploying, we can go ahead and begin creating our data solution. Now, to begin with, we'll open the storage account so that we can be able to upload our data. I mentioned we'll be using Azure Storage to upload and save our data. So once I open the storage account, need to come here onto containers. And then once you click on containers, we'll create a container that is going to hold our data. So I'm just going to name this container datasets. And then I'm just going to click create. So that's going to create the datasets container. Then once I have this container, I can be able to upload the data that we previously downloaded. So if I select a file, and then I guess it's in the downloads right here. It's the dataset we've downloaded. Select that and then upload. So that's going to upload the dataset onto the cloud, and you can be able to see it right here. It has been uploaded inside the datasets container in the Azure Storage. Once we've done that, that's all we will be using Azure Storage for in this case, just saving our dataset. Once now we've done that, the next step is to leverage Cosmos as configure Cosmos DB so that we can be able to load the CSV data into the database. So I'm going to open our Cosmos DB resource. I'm going to open our Cosmos DB resource. And then you can see here, it says we need to create a container. Yeah, we have already created a Cosmos DB account, but we need to create a container because data Cosmos DB is stored in containers. So I'm just going to click on create an items container. Taking a little bit longer than expected. I'm going to close and try again. So I'm just going to open Cosmos DB, and then I'm just going to click add a container. That works as well. So you need to provide a database ID. I'm just going to give it a name. Maybe I can call this like COVID-19 trends data, maybe something like that. And then under container ID, I'm just going to provide maybe case count, partition key. I'm just going to provide that as ID, and then just go ahead and create the container on Cosmos DB. So this should go ahead and create. I can see the Synapse Analytics resource has been created. So let's wait for Cosmos DB to create the container. Once we have the container ready, that's where we'll be storing our data. That's where we'll load the data from the CSV file we've created on Azure Storage, or we've uploaded on Azure Storage. So once we create the container right here, and you can see we have the container right here, COVID-19 trends data. You can be able to see, and you can see the container ID case count here. And if you click on items, right now you see it's empty. So once we load the data from the CSV file, you should be able to see the items populating right here. Good. Now that we've created the container, the next thing is now using Azure Data Factory. We already created a resource for Azure Data Factory. We'll use it now to transform and load data into Cosmos DB. So I'm going to open our resource group again so that I can access the Data Factory resource that we created. It's here. You can see the Data Factory. So once we open, we're going to open the Azure Data Factory Studio. So just come right here and open the Azure Data Factory Studio. So this should take a few seconds to load. So once we open the Azure Data Factory, this is the landing page for Azure Data Factory. We are going to ingest the data so that, and to do that, we are going to specify our source and also our destination. So for that, we'll be using a built-in copy task where we copying data from the CSV file into the Cosmos DB. So I'm going to select the built-in copy task, and I'm going just to run it once. So then I'm going to click next. Then the source type, we're copying this from Azure Blob Storage, and then we're going to create a new connection between Azure Data Factory and the Azure Blob Storage. So I'm going to call these Azure Blob Storage Dataquest connection. I'm just going to call it con, and then right here, I'm going to select my subscription. I select my subscription, and then the storage account name for this one, we give the name as Dataquest webinar. Once we do that, you select it needs to be to linked service, and then you create the connection. All right. Once we've already created the connection to the source, the next thing will be to browse the folder. Remember, we created a container on Azure Storage, which we called datasets, and that's where we uploaded our data. So inside here, I'm just going to select that folder, or rather that container, which is the datasets, and then open. And then from there, ensure you check right there, and then that's all we have to do there. So next, so it's going to get the file format settings, and then that's correct as it is. Then we're going to select the destination where we are saving. So this is in Cosmos DB and CoSQL. So we're using the SQL API, and then the connection. We're going to create a new connection. So for this, I'm going to call Cosmos DB Dataquest. Then the subscription, I'm going to select my subscription. So use the subscription you created your resources on, and then select the account name. It's the Dataquest webinar, and then the database name is the COVID-19 trend data. Remember, we've just created those just right now, and then you just need to go ahead and create the connection to the destination. Once that is done, so remember we created a container ID when you were creating, so you just select that, and then that's all you need to do there. So you're specifying, I'm copying from the Azure Blob Storage file into this container on Azure Cosmos DB. So select the case count, which was our container ID, and then, oh, sorry, we need to skip schema mapping for all tables, and then go next. So I'm going to give this task a name. So for this task, maybe I can call it copy data from Blob Storage to Cosmos. Give it a name, and then it's going to go ahead and then you verify, confirm everything is correct. So we're copying from Azure Blob Storage to Cosmos DB, and then next, and then it's going to run. You can see it's in progress. It's running the pipeline, and it has succeeded. So having said it has succeeded, if we go back to Cosmos DB now, go back to the resource group, we open our resource group and check inside the Cosmos DB. If we were to open Cosmos DB right here, and then go to Data Explorer. Remember when the last time we checked, this was empty. So let's check whether it has successfully. So let's open the database and open on items and see whether anything has been loaded. So you can be able to see we have data that is actually populating right here. So you can be able to see we have data for all these different fields. So we've been able to copy data from our CSV file that is on Azure Storage, and we've been able to copy that data onto Cosmos DB through using Azure Data Factory. So you can be able to see the possibilities that exist here with Azure Data Factory, just like the same scenario I gave, where maybe you have an e-commerce application that is logging on the cloud, and maybe you have on-prem data such as user info, and you want to be able to load or rather join the data for on-prem data and your data on the cloud. You can be able to see the capability and scale at which you can be able to achieve that using Azure Data Factory. Now that we've been able to achieve the first part, which is loading data from Blob Storage to Cosmos DB, now let's see how we can be able to take this a step further and be able to visualize this data onto Power BI. To do this, we're going to be leveraging Azure Synapse. Now, if we come here, still inside Cosmos DB, and you scroll down under integrations, and remember, one of the good features I mentioned for Cosmos DB is its ability to integrate with other existing Azure services. And you can be able to see out of the box, it's able to directly integrate with Power BI, Azure Synapse Link, Cognitive Search, and even Azure Functions. So for our case, because we just need to visualize, you can just click on Power BI, and then you just need to enable the Synapse Link for this account. So if you had not created an Azure Synapse resource before, you're going to get a wizard from here where you can be able to go ahead and configure and deploy an Azure Synapse Analytics workspace, and then you can be able to link it onto your Cosmos DB account. So let's just give it a little bit of time for it to enable. And at this moment, I can pause as we wait for this to happen. And Vic, I don't know whether we have questions on chat that I can be able to maybe respond to as we await for this to.
Yeah, so one question that seems relevant, Josh, is could we not have directly uploaded the CSV to the SQL database?
To Cosmos DB, right?
I think that's the spirit of the question. Yeah, it doesn't specify, but it says the SQL database, but yes.
Yeah, so to load that particular data to load the particular data into Cosmos DB, there are other methods that you can be able to load directly, but for you to be able to work with this data, as you'll be seeing, for maybe you want to be able to access the different columns from this data, you'll have to extract that data from a CSV file so that you can be able to store it in a particular database. That way you can be able to perform operations onto it. There are different methods you can be able to achieve that, but it's easier the way we've done it, where you just are able to upload your data onto Blob Storage and then extract the data from the CSV file and then load it directly into Cosmos DB. But if you need to do those operations, you won't necessarily have to store your CSV file into Cosmos DB. You'll have to extract that data and then so that you can be able to perform or whatever operations you need to do from there, whether it's visualization or maybe you're porting that data maybe to an ML workload. You'll have to extract and then store it onto the database before moving forward with further operations. All right, so we've enabled the Synapse Link on this account. So the next thing is to select the containers that we're going to visualize in Power BI. So I'm just going to select the container we created, this one right here, the case count. And then once I do that, once I select that, I'm just going to scroll down here, click next. All right, so we just click next. So right here, we now need to select the workspace for Synapse. So I'm just going to select my subscription, and then we select our Azure Synapse workspace. So we had created. If you had not created, you can just click on Create New, and it's going to present you with a similar dialog to the other one that we had when creating. Then right here, we're going to create a database. So for this one, I can call it COVID-19 trends data, and then create. This should be able to allow us to click on next. Something I noticed earlier on today, so I realized was just exiting and then coming back to notice that earlier on today. So click back on Power BI, and then it will be easier to proceed again. So we're going to select our containers and then next. and then next. Should select our subscription, should select our workspace. Yeah, and then we should select our database. And then click next. Yep, works. Okay, just need to give it a little bit more time. And I see we're running out of time. So if this won't be done, I will use a different demo that I know still at 99%. So you'll allow me to use a different resource. So I had a different resource group that I had done the same process. And I'm just going to use that so that I can be able to show you the last part, which is being able to visualize these through Azure Synapse onto Power BI. So I had Cosmos DB right here. It's still the same data. I had just had these just in case something fails with the demo. Click on Power BI on the integrations, and then good. You see, this is complete, so we can just go next, and then we can be able to select our workspace. So I'll just select the subscription, just like we were doing in the previous demo. And then this one is complete. So I'm just going to select the one associated with this resource group. And then I'll select the database like that, and then click on next. So this one should provide us with a PBIDS file that we can be able to download and open in Power BI. So I'm just going to click on download this file. Then I'm just going to click on open. So this should open up Power BI. So this should be open up in Power BI. So if you don't have Power BI on your desktop installed, you just need to install it. So good. Yeah, all right. Normally after opening the file, this is what you'll be presented with actually. So you can be able to see the connection right here. So we're going to select the tables that we need for this. And then I'm just going to click load so that it can load it onto Power BI. Right, I'm just going to close Power BI and load it up again. And in the meantime, Vic, I can take one question as I restart Power BI.
All right, great. Ernest asks, since you uploaded a CSV file, how is the data set going to be updated?
Okay, so since this is a CSV file and this CSV file is not a live file, but what that means is it's not a file that you are constantly uploading, rather updating. It's kind of final in the way it is, but you can always download, update, and then upload a different copy or a different version of the same. So there are two ways you can be able to approach this. One, you can be able to set up a workflow that is going to be triggered automatically whenever you have a new CSV file uploaded onto your container on Azure Blob Storage. And then once you have that, it's going to run the trigger, it's going to run the task and then be able to update Cosmos DB. That could be one approach where you have maybe something like maybe an Azure function that is listening to the changes on Cosmos DB whenever we have changes, and then you can be able to have those reflect. But currently, as it is, the CSV file, once we've already done that, if you remember the task that we chose, it just runs once at that particular time and it's done. But you can be able to set up a different workflow so that whenever you have a new CSV file uploaded, maybe a different version of the same, the flow is triggered and then you can be able to have that updated. So now let me continue because I can see the file has already opened onto Power BI. So I'm going to select the related tables right here. So select that. So I'm just going to select it and then I'm going to load it. I'll do these a little bit fast because we're running a little bit short on time. So these should now prompt me to authenticate, and I'm just going to use my Microsoft account for that. And then from here, I can be able to create the visualizations from the data that is coming in from Cosmos DB. Okay, so I'm already signed in. using my Microsoft account. So it didn't prompt me to sign in, but on your end, most likely you'll be presented with a wizard where you have to sign in. So just select sign in and then sign in with the Microsoft account. Ensure you select that and then use the Microsoft account that has the subscription, that has your Azure subscription. Sign in with that, and then you'll find yourself onto this view. Now, once we are here, we can be able to visualize our data, and maybe we can start by visualizing the case counts against the date. But you can see the different columns that we have. So if I come here and look at case count, I can see the data type is text. So I can come ahead and go ahead and change this maybe to the data type to a whole number, so that I can be able to visualize that in a chart. And also the date of interest, I can change these also from text to a date time data type. From there, I can be able to maybe drag a line chart onto the view. So, and then right here, I can be able to select maybe the x-axis. I can drag in the date of interest right there. And then for the y-axis, maybe I can use the case count. And then you can be able to come down here as it's making the changes. You can be able to change maybe all the other different data here, but the most important thing is you can be able to see it has generated for you your data, or rather a visualization of your case count against the date of interest, and has plotted for you a line graph. So from here, with all the data that you're getting, these are the different columns that you have. You can be able to now create your reports on Power BI with all of this data that is coming from Cosmos DB. So that shows you an end-to-end pipeline of how we were able to load data, or rather extract data from a CSV file, load it into Cosmos DB, and eventually create a simple report on Power BI. And from here, you can be able to do a ton of different things. Maybe from Cosmos DB, maybe you didn't want to visualize, maybe you wanted to port that data into an ML workload. That's a possibility. So there's just a lot that you can be able to achieve from that point. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can allow Vic to proceed with the remaining part, but just to show you the possibility and the scale at which you can be able to achieve data analytics and perform data operations at scale on the cloud. So those are some of the few services that we have on Azure that you can be able to leverage, and I hope we can be able to look at some of these in the future in depth.
Thanks so much, Josh, for that great presentation. I'm going to go quick so you have time for a couple of questions at the end. But there is a new course on Dataquest about cloud data fundamentals on using Microsoft Azure. So all the concepts we covered today and more, you'll be able to learn in a hands-on way. So that's going to cover relational data and non-relational data, data warehousing and analytics, all in Azure. And it's going to be hands-on. So there are going to be 8 lessons where you actually use the Azure portal to complete tasks with real exercises. And there's a project at the end where you're setting up a cloud data architecture for a company. So similar to how Josh was just putting together an architecture, that's part of this course. And the course will prepare you for the Azure Data Fundamentals certification exam, that DP 900 exam. And if you complete the course, you actually get a 50% off voucher on the exam as well. So you'll get more details about this course in your email, but just check the Dataquest course catalog for more information. All right, now let's do a little bit of Q&A. There are a couple of questions about the specifics of what Josh was doing that I think would be good to answer. So Hari asked, where do we use the Azure Data Factory, since we didn't do any transformation of the data?
Okay. In this particular scenario, we actually did a little bit of that when we were extracting the data. We did not do much of the transformation because we just extracted data and then loaded it into Cosmos DB. But that's where the Azure Data Factory came in, where we did run a task when extracted data from the CSV file and loaded that into Cosmos DB.
All right, fantastic. And then Caesar asks, does each Azure service like Cosmos DB, Data Factory, and Synapse, do they all have their own cost associated?
Yes. Yeah, each of these services has a different cost. And the best way to approach these, especially when you're building your data solution, you can always use the Azure calculator and put in the different Azure services that you'll be using. And then that you can be able to have a rough estimate of how much it's going to cost you per month for all the different services that you'll be leveraging to build your data solution.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. And then the last question is, what happens if the data in the CSV is updated? Do you have to upload it and do the whole process again?
The way we've already created it right now, if you were to upload and run that task again, definitely there will be some duplications eventually onto Cosmos DB. But you can be able to create a workload or rather a task that can be able to run whatever has been updated of the different versions and have that updated as well.
All right. And then Ernest wants to know why you chose Europe East for the region. Is there any benefit to that for the region for all the services you chose Europe East?
West Europe.
West, I guess.
Yeah. So it's that is based on where I'm based off and who is accessing the services, or rather where based off. When you're selecting some of these regions, definitely it's going to boil down to maybe where do you want your data processed from? Maybe that's something you're considering for your organization. Maybe in a particular region, certain data needs to be processed within the region. So those are things you'll have to consider. And sometimes you'll consider things like where is your audience, or rather where are the majority of your users, where they are located. So the different factors that you will put into that when you're selecting the different regions. And I guess Vika can send you a URL that you can be able to share out with more info about that as well.
Okay, that was our last question, folks. Thanks so much for joining and really appreciate your time, Josh, for being here. This was a great webinar. Thanks, folks. Have a great rest of your day.